In Chapter 1, we're going to talk about expressions, equations, and functions. In Section 1, we're going to focus on variables and expressions and learn some vocab words that we'll refer to for the rest of the year. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to write a verbal expression for an algebraic expression and write an algebraic expression for a verbal expression. So this means taking words and turning it into math. And this one means taking math, the algebraic expression, and turning it into words. Now this one tends to be a little easier just because if I asked you to say a math equation out loud, you're already doing this one. This one's a little harder. So here's some vocab. Algebraic expressions consist of sums and or products of numbers and variables. So we already know what numbers are. Variables, remember, are symbols used to represent unspecified numbers or values. Our favorite variable of all time is x. We tend to use that one a lot. Any variable is okay for the most part. We tend to stay away from s's, t's, o's, because they look like numbers that we use. A term, this one's pretty important. A term is a number, a variable, or the product or quotient of a number and variable. So something like 15 or m or 2 times x or z divided by 6 is all one term. The second that you add a plus sign or a minus sign, this now becomes two separate terms. This is one term and that's another term. But a term could be huge. Something like this, because there's no plus or minus sign in there, this is all one term. Factors are quantities being multiplied in a multiplication expression. So you guys remember making factor trees back in the day? Like 10, you'd factor it into 2 and 5. 2 times 5 gives you 10. Those were the factors of it. And products is what you get when you multiply 2 or more factors. And then we represent these a bunch of different ways. We tend to use this guy and this guy a lot. We don't tend to use the dot very often because it could look like a decimal depending on your handwriting. And we usually put parentheses around the second thing, but all of these are totally acceptable ways to write a product. You guys should be familiar with powers, exponents, and bases from 8th grade. Something like this is a power. So the exponent would be the n in this case, that's what's up top, and the base is the x. So remember, if I give you something like 3 to the 4th power, that means that you have 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So you have it 4 times. So the base tells you what's being multiplied, and the exponent tells you how many times you're going to multiply it. So let's get to our objectives. We need to write a verbal expression for these algebraic expressions. And let's just do B. So if I asked you to say this out loud to your friend, chances are you wouldn't say 5z2 plus sign 16. You wouldn't say it like that. But instead you might say something like 5 times z squared plus 16. And that is a perfectly valid way to write this. So we're going to write that one down. 5 times z squared plus 16. Now, in a book or something that I give you on a test or a quiz, I might say something like 16 more than the product of 5 and z to the 2nd power. And something like this means exactly the same thing as what we just came up with. It just sounds a little more confusing. So that's part of what we're going to do next, is taking words and turning it into math. And this is the one that people tend to struggle with. But if you know these words, you should be good to go. So you need to know other words that we can say for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Most of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory, but some of them get people. Like the word of means multiplication. So read over these, make sure that you know them. I'm not going to have you write them down or anything, but if you see them, you need to know what they are. So let's try to write an algebraic expression. So the first one says a number t more than 6. So stop and think about what that means. That means you have 6. And then you want t more than that. So if we come back here, more than means addition. So that means that we are going to add t to 6. Now remember our properties. We're going to go over them again later, but you can switch these around if you wanted to because it is a plus sign. But one like B says 10 less than the product of 7 and F. So product we know means multiplication. So we have 7 and F being multiplied. Now if I want 10 less than that, we have two ways of writing it. It could look like this, or it could look like this. And these mean two totally different things because of the subtraction sign. So we got to think about it. We got to figure out which one we want. So if I tell you that I have $100 and you have 10 less than me, you're going to do 100 and you're going to take away 10, right? You're not going to have 10 and take away 100. That doesn't make any sense. So we want the one that has 7F and then we take away 10 from it. Last one, 2/3 of the volume V. Remember, this was one of the words I said were tricky. The word of means multiplication. So we have 2/3, that's a fraction. Of means multiplication, and there's a volume V. And you could write this without the dot. Like I said, we don't tend to do the dot anymore. This is how you would see it in a textbook. I want you guys to try these two on your own in addition to these two right here. Both of these have to do with taking words, obviously, and turning them into math. So these are the ones that are a little bit harder. I'm going to walk around and check that both of these slides were at least attempted. So if you are totally lost, that is okay, but make sure you have something written down here and we can go over it in class tomorrow. Make sure you write down any other questions you have and we can also go over those. Enjoy your night.